Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. One quote that has come up from various sources, a 1857 speech by Frederick Douglass, where he says, "Power concedes nothing without a demand. Power concedes nothing without a demand." Back in SDS, we had the concept of non-negotiable demands. The poverty now is such, the intellectual poverty, is that there are no demands. Imagine one commentator saying, the Tea Party said, cut spending. What does Occupy Wall Street say? Well, it should say tax Wall Street turnover, Wall Street sales tax, student loan amnesty, stop foreclosures, and no austerity cuts. How about that for a program? Let's get a report from the scene. Let's go talk to our friend Eric Draitser in New York City, somebody who's been following the evolution of Occupy Wall Street day to day, hour to hour. Welcome, Eric. Yes.
Yeah. So let's sort of discuss some of the major developments of this week. So the one that I want to highlight first, just because this is the most pressing one, and that is, I think you mentioned this at some point, the possibility of the Occupy Wall Street movement breaking down and transitioning into violence. There's a march that's organized, I believe, for tomorrow morning, and this is a march against police brutality, the usual stock in trade of the anarchist infiltrators of the movement. So this march is designed essentially to confront the New York Police Department for this, quote-unquote, this police brutality. Now, from my sources that I've been talking to, there are a lot of people, both within the movement and observers outside of this movement, who are really concerned that this is the moment where the violence breaks out. They're concerned that the Direct Action Committee, this committee within the Occupy Wall Street group that I've mentioned before, that the Direct Action Committee is steering this into a violent confrontation, and that the possibility of violence is greater now than it has been at any time before. Now, when we've seen these marches up until this point, the marches have been seemingly pointless but relatively innocuous, marching to Times Square, marching to the Brooklyn Bridge or whatever, and having these minor scrapes with the police. However, this march seems to be different. This is specifically designed to attack the police or to confront the police, and it is my opinion, and again, I speak only from my opinion here, it's my opinion that this is a provocation, this is an inciting of the police, and perhaps in hopes of getting some kind of violence, and this is a way of breaking the movement, and it's a way of providing ammunition to the critics of this movement who can bring it down in the court of public opinion. So I wanted to point this one out, and I've spoken to a couple of different sources, and these are people who are not like me, who are sort of outside of this. This is people who are directly within the core group who have been there since the beginning, and they're becoming very disaffected by this whole thing because, one person really close to some of the key members told me that that they had sort of thought that the first month would be a numbers growing period, but that once you got past the first month, the demands would come forward, and the political arm of this, in other words, the sort of the tip of the political spear of Occupy Wall Street would take center stage, and it has not. And so a lot of the people are becoming very disaffected by this.
I think we're at approximately the 35-day mark, if I'm not mistaken. Huh? So 35 days and no significant demands.
That's right. And when you press them on the demands, you get individual people who will tell you demands, but this is never articulated in a programmatic way from the supposed leadership of this, supposedly leaderless movement. This is the idea that without articulating them in the form of a programmatic set of demands, you get nothing out of the movement as a whole, merely disparate voices. And I think this is the idea, that you keep this thing leaderless, you prevent the leaders from emerging, and thereby you prevent a programmatic set of demands from emerging. And if you can do that, you can keep this movement impotent. And I mentioned to somebody that you're about 5 blocks away from Maiden Lane, and you've never made one march on Maiden Lane, but you marched up to Times Square. Explain the purpose of that.
That, of course, being the New York Fed.
Right, exactly. And explain the purpose of that to me, and as you can imagine, nobody could. And the reason is because it is this Direct Action Committee. The more I go down there, the more I speak to people, the more I realize it is the Direct Action Committee, the DAC, which is actually steering all of these stupidity, these stupid attempts at publicity stunts. What doesn't make sense to me is, why do you need more publicity? You have all the publicity in the world. It's time for a political program. And, of course, this is what they're keeping down. Now,
all right. Maybe we can profile some of these DAC people. Last night, Michael Moore was on Olbermann. Michael Moore is trying to profile himself as the one who really speaks for the movement. He says they should stay the way they are. Don't change a hair for me, not if you care for me. No leaders, no program. And I think it's clear it allows Michael Moore to promote himself.
Yeah, and also I was actually going to get to that one in a minute, but the Michael Moore appearance is really significant, because if you remember a couple of weeks ago, I came on the show and I told you that Michael Moore came down there and he was not well received. Yesterday, Michael Moore was down there again, and sad to say, but it's true, he was much better received this time. So I think what this indicates to you is the shifting demographic, the shifting makeup of the Occupy Wall Street movement. This is less and less becoming, I think, a true collection of nonpartisan, politically minded people who want to affect positive change, and instead this is becoming more and more filled with Democratic Party operatives and various other members of the establishment and their dupes and their useful idiots.
During the week, you were telling me that it looked like some kind of an ebb had set in. Do you think that the ebb, at least momentarily, is confirmed?
Well, it's hard to say. 2 days ago, I was down there, and there were very few people there, and almost nobody of the core group that I know. But there was also, it was also a day of poor weather. I was down there again yesterday, and it was much larger than it had been the day before. But I will say that it was less excited. The group that was there was much less excited. You didn't have this buzz. The energy, which had been there a couple of weeks ago, seems to have been sucked out of the room. In much the same way that Obama sucked the energy out of the room of the anti-war movement. I feel like the Democratic Party operatives and the various other people, infiltrators, et cetera, who are there, have sucked the energy out of the park, if you want to call it that.
Let me just add the comparison. I walked through D.C. downtown this week, and I looked at McPherson Square, I looked at Freedom Plaza, and it's essentially a bunch of pup tents with very few people, and the ones that are there are bedraggled, and a lot of them are old hippies, and a lot of them are pretty marginal. And I asked them for leaflets, and they really didn't have any leaflets with anything on them, just sort of leaflets about when they have their General Assembly and when they have their march and stuff like this.
Yeah, and also something I'd mentioned already, that From my firsthand sort of interpretation, I'm seeing more and more of the people who were excited 2 weeks ago being dejected today. And again, I think this directly ties into the notion that they believed that by this point they would have an articulated set of demands, that by this point they would be making some kind of political progress, and instead it is all publicity.
Hang on 1 second. We'll be right back on World Crisis Radio.